But along with these precious fabrics, it had the plague on the boat. On April 3rd, a Turkish passenger died. 7 sailors and the ship's doctor died of the plague on the return voyage. So the captain stopped at Cyprus, an island in the Mediterranean, where he got a bill of health. He was quarantined, not a clean bill, a bill. He was quarantined, and the ship sailed on to Livorno, Italy. And the Italian doctors said to the ship, keep going on, move on. And the captain wanted to move on quickly too. He had such valuable cargo, and he wanted to arrive at Marseilles before the annual Beaucaire Fair, a medieval festival that actually continues on to this day. Huge party, dancing, drinking, commerce, the running of the bulls, believe it or not, like in Pamplona. So this ship's captain wanted to get back to Marseille quickly because he had 100,000 écus, let's call it $100 million worth of stuff he wanted to sell. So this captain, Jean-Baptiste Chateau, he pulls into Marseille and he tells the owners of the ship and the goods within it what's really going on. As in, there's no way they're going to allow that ship into Marseille without the maximum quarantine, 40 days, maybe more. Well, the owners, they got a fortune on this boat. So the owners, they go to work on their friends on the sanitation board. Tell them, oh, the plague is a thing of the past. What are you worried about? So the sanitation board simply tells the captain to go back to Livorno, Italy, another beautiful port city, to get a clean bill of health from there. Go back to Livorno and have them give you a clean bill of health, not just a bill of health. Have them say you're clean. Now, had they checked the captain's log, they would see he was in Syria, where there was the plague. Had they made inquiries, they would find that a bunch of sailors and the ship's doctor had died. But instead, they just sent the ship to get someone else's paperwork in another town. Now, Livorno is about 500 kilometers away, approximately. So several days each way. But that's better than a 40, 60-day quarantine in Marseille that you might never be allowed in. And the Livorno authorities in Italy, for whatever reason, they just issue him a clean bill of health, which he sails right back to Marseille, arriving back at the island of Pomègue on May 25th. So after a short quarantine, he's let in on June 4th. And there it went. The plague was back in Marseille in 1720. That is very recent when you think about it. That's 100 years after Shakespeare's time. That's 50 years after the Hudson's Bay Company is founded in Canada. So it's not medieval times. Within weeks, it was obvious what had happened. They quarantined the ship, then they burned the ship. Yeah, a bit late for that, fellas. There were about 90,000 people living in Marseille then. 50,000 of them died. Of course, even in those days, people traveled. Another 50,000 died in neighboring areas of France. The plague raged on for 2.5 years until January 1723. The authorities literally built a wall, a plague wall, to seal off Marseille from the rest of France. That wall is still there today. So what's my point of this horrible, horrible story? I suppose, like the Spanish flu details I shared with you yesterday, it's just a reminder that in the sweep of history, this coronavirus will likely not be remembered for its death toll, but rather the fumbling of the issue in the first place by our political leaders, the making it into an economic crisis, the restricted civil liberties. We've had, thankfully, fewer than 3,000 deaths in Canada compared to the 50,000 deaths from the Spanish flu, and that was when our country had 1/4 of the population. Much less than the countless millions dead from the plague. It's interesting, I was reading that throughout the 18th century, there were more than 20,000 ships that arrived in Marseille from Syria or Turkey or North Africa, places where the plague was rampant. Out of those 140 ships, or less than 1%, were contaminated. Plague ships continued to arrive in Marseille for decades, but they were stopped and quarantined. 1 in 100 had the plague, 1 in 1,000 contaminated Marseille at all. And then that one ship killed 100,000 souls. Boy, I'm glad I live now and here rather than then and there, aren't you? That's an excerpt from my daily show, the Ezra Levant Show. Every day I do a monologue on the news of the day, then I interview an interesting guest, and then I read my hate mail. You gotta subscribe. Go to rebelnews.com.